8 months. For almost 250 days, I have been living in my son's house. 250 days, I wake up in the room that used to be his office. And for the first few seconds of every morning, I think I'm still in my house on Clinton Street, the house I lost. I lie on the bed, too narrow for someone used to a spacious mattress. I look up at the ceiling and remember how it all went wrong. First, Susan's death. Cancer took her quickly, just 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. Then my heart attack, the result of stress, loneliness, and possibly a broken heart. And then the medical bills that devoured my savings like hungry fish tossing pieces of bread into a fish tank. My small retirement fund was melting away before my eyes. The house Susan and I bought 30 years ago was too expensive for a single retiree. And here I am in Grafton, at the home of Keith and Vanessa, my son and his wife. Gilbert, you forgot to turn off the bathroom light again. Vanessa stands in the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a familiar line of disapproval. Electricity isn't free these days, you know. I'm sorry, Vanessa. My voice sounds too conciliatory, even for my own ears. I forgot. You forget a lot of things lately. She glances at her watch. Breakfast is in 15 minutes. Don't be late. Vanessa leaves, and I'm left sitting on the bed, clutching a shabby photo album, one of the few items I brought with me. Most of the stuff has gone at garage sales or been given to charity stores. 72 years of life packed into 3 suitcases. I struggle to rise, joints protesting every movement. At 72, my body is a constant reminder of itself, whether it's back pain or shortness of breath after climbing the stairs. But worse than physical ailments is the dependence on others, on the mercy of a son, on my daughter-in-law's patience, which I realize has long since run out. Breakfast passes in the usual silence. Keith hurries to work, his eyes fixed on his phone where he's going through his work email. Vanessa is elegant, even in her house clothes. She's a top real estate agent at a local agency, and every day she's scheduled to show houses to potential buyers. I made oatmeal, I say, trying to make conversation. I added apple and cinnamon, just the way you like it, Keith. My son looks up, as if he's just now noticing I'm here. Thanks, Dad. He quickly eats a few spoonfuls. It's good. Sorry, it's a crazy day. We're having trouble getting supplies from Canada. Vanessa barely touches her portion. I'm on a diet, Gilbert. You might want to ask before you cook for everyone. She pushes her plate away and pulls a yogurt out of the fridge. Besides, we've been spending too much on groceries lately. I can feel my face reddening. My paltry pension barely covers my medical expenses and some little things. I tried to offer money for living expenses, but Keith refused. Don't be silly, Dad. You're my dad. We'll get through this. But I can see Vanessa's lips tighten every time he says that. To her, I'm a burden, an extra mouth, an unexpected expense. I try to make up for my presence cooking when I can stand at the stove, gardening even though every bend causes my back to ache. After breakfast, Keith hurriedly says goodbye and leaves. He'll be working late. It's become the norm lately. Logistical problems, new clients, urgent deliveries. Vanessa leaves soon after, too, leaving me alone in a house that will never be mine. I walk out into the garden, a small plot with a neatly trimmed lawn and a few flower beds. I sit down on a bench and let the sun warm my old bones. I think back to my garden. Lush, a little unkept, with apple trees that Susan and I planted the year Keith was born. I wonder if the new owners kept them or cut them down. My orchard, like my house, now belongs to other people. I sold it for less than it was worth. The real estate market was in decline, and I needed the money urgently to pay medical bills. Ironically, Vanessa, being a realtor, could have helped me get a better price, but she only suggested looking for a good nursing home when Keith brought up the fact that I was having a hard time living alone after my heart attack. Nursing home. The thought of it makes me shiver, even on a warm day. I've seen these places, the sterile hallways, the smell of medication, and the loneliness disguised as care. No, as long as I can walk and think, I won't give up. I force myself up and walk over to the flower bed I've favored since moving in. Vanessa didn't mind when I offered to take care of the flowers. It saves money on a gardener. The weeds keep me from thinking about the past. I methodically pull them out, ignoring the pain in my knees. In a past life, I was an accountant for a small construction company. 40 years calculating other people's income and expenses, planning project budgets, filling out tax forms, ordinary work that would never bring riches but provided stability. Susan and I lived modestly but not in want. We were saving for retirement, but who could have foreseen that medical bills would eat up all the savings? By lunchtime, I'm back at the house. Vanessa has asked me not to cook tonight. She's bringing food from the restaurant. That means she'll be complaining about the extra expense tonight, indirectly alluding to my presence as the source of her financial problems. I sit down in my chair, cracking open a book, a detective book I found at the local library. Murder stories are strangely comforting. Their problems are always solved by the last page. The guilty are punished and justice is served. If only real life were as predictable. Vanessa's phone, left on the table, vibrates with an incoming message. I don't intend to peek, but the name Reed pops up on the screen along with the beginning of the message. I can't wait to see you again. Last time was... I look away. It's none of my business. Reed is the neighbor across the street, a divorced man in his early 40s. He often stops by when Keith's away, ostensibly to help with the heavy housework. Vanessa always perks up in his presence. But I'm not a gossip or a spy. I won't complicate my already complicated life by meddling in other people's affairs. At least not yet. Vanessa returns in the evening with boxes of Thai food and slightly flushed cheeks. Keith calls and says he'll be late. Problems with the paperwork for customs. Again, Vanessa rolls her eyes. Sometimes I think he's looking for reasons not to come home. Keith has always been responsible, I defend my son. Even in high school, he finished every project, even if it meant staying up all night. Yeah, the perfect son, I can hear the tiredness in her voice. Eat before it gets cold. We sit at a table that's too big for two. Vanessa checks something on her phone, glancing up at me every now and then, as if wondering if I'm still here. I'm thinking about getting a job, I say suddenly. Part-time, maybe an accounting consultant or something. Vanessa raises her eyebrows. At your age, who would hire you? It hurts, but I don't let it show. I have 40 years of experience, Vanessa. Somebody could use that. Sure, she shrugs. Just don't forget that you need more rest after your heart attack. We can't risk your health, can we? Keith would be against it. Her concern sounds fake. We both know she'd rather I contribute to the family budget, but she's also afraid Kit will blame her if something happens to me. I'll be careful, I promise. A little part-time work will only make me feel better. A man has to be useful. Of course, Vanessa smiles, but her eyes remain cold. Talk to Keith about it. After dinner, I help clear the table, though Vanessa assures me she can do it herself. She doesn't like me in the kitchen, her territory. In my first weeks here, I tried to cook, as I've done for the past few years since Susan left for a part-time job. But each time Vanessa found flaws. Either too much spice, not enough salt, or a dish too simple for her refined palate. Keith returns late when I'm already lying in bed pretending to be asleep. I hear muffled voices from the living room. Vanessa and my son. They're talking about me, I'm sure. I can't make out the words, but Vanessa's tone is quite eloquent. She's not happy. She's tired. She didn't sign up for a life with an old man. I close my eyes and try to think of something pleasant. About fishing with Keith when he was little. About the trip to Yellowstone we took with Susan on our 30th anniversary. About the garden that is no longer mine. Sleep comes slowly, reluctantly, like an unwelcome guest. Half asleep, I hear the floorboards creaking in the hallway. Keith is peeking into my room like he did every night as a child, afraid of the dark and the monsters under the bed. Now he checks to see if I'm breathing. After his heart attack, he's afraid of finding me one day not breathing. I'm okay, son, I whisper, even though I know he can't hear. I'm still here. The morning begins with a new batch of disapproving looks from Vanessa. You left the water in the shower running. She crosses her arms over her chest. Keith noticed when he got back. Last month's water bill was huge. I nod, accepting the accusation, though I'm not sure it's me. My memory isn't the same anymore, but I'm usually very attentive to these things. Frugality has become ingrained in my character over my years as an accountant. Keith's home today. It's Saturday. He's in the garage tinkering with his old motorcycle, a hobby Vanessa disapproves of but tolerates. I join him, filing tools and enjoying the rare moments of companionship. How are you, Dad? Keith wipes the oil off his hands with a rag. Settled in. Vanessa says you want to get a job. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I watch his hands, so similar to mine when I was younger. Deftly handle the tools. I need something to do, Keith, and I could help with the expenses. His face gets serious. Dad, we talked about this. You don't have to worry about money. I'm handling it. Your wife seems to think otherwise. The words come out before I can think about them. Keith sighs and puts the wrench away. Vanessa's just worried about our budget. Times are tough, but we'll get through it, really. I nod, but we both know that's not the whole truth. Vanessa sees me as a burden, a financial hole that's leaking money that could have gone to a new car or a vacation in the Bahamas. I just want to be useful, Keith. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. He squeezes my shoulder, and I feel his strength and reliability. My boy grew up to be a good man, despite my mistakes. You're my father, and this is your home now. I smile, but we both know it isn't. This is Keith and Vanessa's house. I'm here on a bird's license, a temporary guest who stayed too long. The day passes in relative calm. Vanessa leaves to show the house to potential buyers, and Keith and I eat lunch of sandwiches I've made. He talks about work, about problems with Canadian suppliers, about the company's plans to expand to the East Coast. I listen and nod, excited to be a part of his life, even if that part is so small. Vanessa returns in high spirits. The deal is done. The commission will be good. She even smiles at me, though the smile doesn't reach her eyes. We could take Reed out to dinner, she suggests to Keith. He's recently returned from Chicago and brought some great wine. Sure, Keith is clearly not thrilled with the idea, but doesn't object. Dad, do you mind? Of course not, I smile. Reed's an interesting conversationalist. Vanessa gives me a quick glance, as if trying to see if there's some subtext behind what I'm saying, but I keep my face neutral. I learned that from years of working with clients who were trying to hide income from the IRS. Reed arrives at 6 with a bottle of expensive wine and a charming smile. He greets Keith formally, me politely, and hugs Vanessa a little longer than propriety demands. If Keith notices, he doesn't let on. Dinner is casual conversation. Reed talks about his trip, Vanessa about the latest trends in the real estate market. Keith occasionally interjects a comment about work. I'm mostly silent, watching the triangle across from me. Reed often glances at Vanessa when he thinks no one can see. She answers him with a smile I've never seen addressed to Keith. My son seems completely absorbed in his own thoughts, not noticing the electricity running between his wife and his neighbor. I feel a heaviness in my chest, and it's not the harbinger of another heart attack. It's the heaviness of knowledge I don't want to possess, the weight of a decision I may have to make. After dinner, Reed and Vanessa go out on the terrace to smoke, a habit Keith is unaware of. His wife assures me she quit years ago. I stay to help my son with the dishes, pondering whether I should tell him of my suspicions or remain silent. After all, I have no proof, only the suspicions of an old man who probably spends too much time alone making up stories. You're kind of quiet today, Dad. Keith hands me a plate to wipe. Is everything okay? Yeah, just tired. I smile at him. Old age is not fun, you know. You're not old, he laughs. You're eternal. I wish that were true. I wish I could be here long enough to protect him from the pain I feel lies ahead. But I also know that sometimes the best defense is to let the man face the truth himself, no matter how bitter it may be. Reed leaves around 10, hugging Vanessa again for a little longer than necessary. I walk to my room feeling tired in every cell of my body. Age is taking its toll, and each day requires more and more energy to just exist. I sit down on my bed and pull out a picture of Susan, the only one I brought with me. It shows her laughing, her eyes shining, the wind ruffling her hair. We were on a picnic by the lake. Keith was about 5. What would you do, Susie? I whispered to the pictures. Shushpard, you always knew the right thing to do, but the photograph is silent, and I am left alone with my doubts and fears. Fears for my son, for myself, for a future that looks more uncertain every day. I noticed this for the first time about 3 weeks ago. Keith came home from work in a good mood, even whistling something to himself as he took off his coat in the hallway. He smiled when he saw me and asked me how my day was. Just a normal father-son evening. Then Vanessa took him into the kitchen. I didn't eavesdrop, just continued reading my book in the living room. But even through the half-open door, I could see their silhouettes. Vanessa was saying something vigorously, gesturing, and Keith stood with his shoulders slumped. When they returned to the living room 15 minutes later, there was no trace of my son's good mood. "Dad," he began then, avoiding looking me in the eye, "Vanessa and I were thinking that, maybe you should put a little deposit down on your lodging. Just a little bit, just to cover some of the expenses." I nodded, remaining calm. "Of course, Keith, I understand." "So, you don't have to," he added quickly, glancing at Vanessa, who stood with her arms crossed over her chest. "Just if it's not too much trouble." "Keith," Vanessa interrupted him with a strained smile, "your father is a grown man. He realizes we have expenses. Since then, I've been giving them a third of my pension. It has reduced my personal expenses considerably, but I'm not complaining. I do realize that my presence puts an additional strain on their budget, but this case was the first in a series of similar changes. Every time Vanessa is alone with Keith, his attitude toward me changes. Sometimes it's subtle. He's a little more reserved, less eye contact. Sometimes the change is more obvious. He suddenly remembers that I take too long to shower in the morning, or that my medication is costing more than he thought. I noticed this change again this morning. Keith had returned from the night shift. Documentation problems had required his presence until 2 in the morning. He was exhausted but still found the strength to smile at me when I offered him freshly brewed coffee. "Atram, you're the best, Dad," he said, taking the mug. We sat in the kitchen in pleasant silence until he looked at the clock and sighed. "Vanessa's going to wake up soon. We should shower in time." He left, and 20 minutes later, Vanessa came down to the kitchen, already dressed for work. She barely nodded at me as she poured herself a cup of coffee, then went upstairs. I could hear their muffled voices from the bedroom. Again, that peculiar, strained tone she uses when she talks about me. When Keith came downstairs, his face changed. He sat down across from me with his hands on the table. "Dad," Vanessa reminded me, you leave the lights on in your room when you leave, and the bathroom fan often runs for nothing too." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I'm trying to keep an eye on it." "I know," he rubbed his face with his hands. "It's just, the electric bill's gone up, and Vanessa's worried." "I'll be more careful," I promised, but we both knew it wasn't about the light bulb or the fan. It was about me being here, taking up space, consuming resources. After Keith went to bed and Vanessa left for work, I was alone in the house. It's a strange feeling, being alone in someone else's house. Worse than just being alone. I decided to do laundry, a small way to contribute. I gathered my laundry, checked my pockets out of old habit, and headed for the laundry room located in the basement. Keith and Vanessa's house wasn't cheap. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, though they didn't have kids. Vanessa always says they're not ready yet, even though Keith is 42. I think she just doesn't want kids, but she's never said it outright. In the laundry room, I found the laundry already being washed. Apparently, Vanessa had started the machine before she left. There was a stack of ironed clothes on the dryer, Keith's shirts for work. I decided to take them to their bedroom so they wouldn't get wrinkled. Once upstairs, I carefully placed the shirts on the bed and was about to leave when I noticed the dresser drawer pulled out. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed it. It was none of my business what Keith and Vanessa kept in their bedroom. But a corner of paper with the bank's logo on it peeked out of the drawer, and something about it caught my eye. 40 years as an accountant had taught me one thing: financial documents rarely lie. People lie about finances all the time, but the documents themselves, if you know how to read them, usually tell the true story. I hesitated for a second, then carefully pulled the drawer out a little farther. There lay a stack of bank statements, neatly folded and tied with a rubber band. On top was an envelope with a recent date on it: last month. I knew I shouldn't do that. It was an invasion of privacy, a breach of trust, but something told me it was important. Maybe years of working with numbers had developed my intuition when it came to money. Carefully, trying not to disturb the order of the documents, I pulled the top statement from the envelope. It was a statement for an account I'd never heard of, an account in Vanessa Sutton's name, but at a different bank than the one she and Keith used. Running my eyes over the lines, I saw regular receipts, about the same amount each month. Not very large, but not small either, about 15% of Keith's salary. I pulled the drawer out a little farther and found a few more statements for the same account from previous months. Vanessa had been systematically transferring money into a separate account for at least a year. Apparently, the account had been opened shortly after I'd moved in with them. With growing concern, I looked at several statements. The total amount was impressive, more than enough for a down payment on a small house or apartment, or for a long trip somewhere for just the two of us. But not with Keith. When I heard a noise upstairs, Keith must have woken up. I quickly put everything back in its place, slid the drawer shut carefully, and walked out of the bedroom. My heart was pounding like a run I hadn't been able to afford in years. What to do with this information? Tell Keith? He wouldn't believe me. Think I'd been going through their things without permission, which was true. Maybe Vanessa will explain it as personal savings or rainy day money. There's always a reasonable explanation, but my gut told me something was fishy. Over the next few days, I watched Vanessa more closely, noting small details I hadn't noticed before. The way she checks her phone when she thinks no one can see. How often she stays late after work, explaining it by showing houses to potential clients. How her voice changes when she talks about Reed, a neighbor who has become a frequent visitor to our house. Friday night, I overheard part of a phone conversation Vanessa was having in the backyard, thinking I was napping in my room. "No, I can't tonight," she said quietly. "Keith will be home." "Yeah, of course I want to. You know how I am." She laughed, that special laugh I never heard when she was talking to my son. "Okay, tomorrow afternoon, I'll tell her I'm showing a house in Westfield. We'll have a few hours." When she came back into the house, she had a slight smile on her face, which disappeared as soon as she noticed me in the chair with the book. "Gilbert," she said my name like it was something unpleasant. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." "I thought I'd read before I went to bed," I replied, not lifting my eyes from the book. "It's a lovely evening, isn't it?" "Yes, it's a pleasure," she said, clearly nervous. "Keith called. He's going to be late for work." "Again?" I looked up. The poor boy works so hard. "Yeah, work takes a lot of time." She looked away. "Send him. I'm going to take a shower." Yesterday morning, Saturday, Vanessa announced at breakfast, "I have a showing at the Westfield house today. I'll be back this afternoon." Keith, exhausted from yesterday's late shift, just nodded, keeping his eyes on his coffee. I'd noticed how gaunt he'd gotten over the past few months. Work and domestic stress were taking their toll. After Vanessa left, Keith and I spent the morning in the garage. He fiddled with the bike, I handed him tools, and we talked about nothing. I didn't dare broach the subject of his marriage. It wasn't my place to get involved, and I had essentially no proof. Only the suspicions of an old man who probably sees problems where there are none. Around noon, Keith's phone rang. He was urgently summoned to work. Problems with a delivery that a major customer was waiting for. He apologized, took a quick shower, and left, leaving me alone in the house. Vanessa had forgotten her phone. It was on the coffee table, must have fallen out of her bag in a hurry. The blinking light showed that a new message had arrived. I shouldn't have done that. I know I shouldn't have. But concern for my son overshadowed my moral compass. I picked up my phone and saw a message notification from Reed on the lock screen. "Waiting for you. Bought that wine you—" The rest wasn't visible without unlocking the phone. I put it back, feeling a mixture of guilt and anxiety. My sister-in-law had clearly lied about her plans for the day, and the neighbor was complicit in that lie. A little later, Vanessa called the house phone, her voice sounding strangely strained. "Gilbert, I think I forgot my phone at home. Would you mind checking?" "Yes, it's right here on the coffee table," I answered in as neutral a tone as possible. "Oh, good," she paused. There were no calls or messages?" "I didn't check, Vanessa," I lied. "It's your personal cell phone." "Of course it is." She was quiet again. Is Keith home?" "No, he got called into work. There's a problem with a shipment." "I see," she sounded relieved. "I'll be right there." The show ended sooner than I thought. When she returned, she was slightly flushed, her hair loose, though it had been in a neat bun that morning. She smelled of wine and someone else's cologne. She quickly grabbed her phone, checked the screen, and seemed to relax when she didn't see any missed calls from Keith. "How was the fashion show?" I asked, watching her over my glasses. "Good. The customers are interested." She didn't look me in the eye. "I'm going to go change." That evening, when Keith got home, Vanessa was charming. She cooked his favorite meal, asked him about his day with exaggerated attention. He blossomed under that attention, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was guilt-driven or if she was just manipulating him. I hesitated whether to tell Keith or keep quiet. Without hard evidence, it would sound like the ramblings of a jealous old man trying to destroy his son's marriage. Vanessa would probably see it that way. But can I live with that knowledge, watching my son return day after day to the woman who betrays him? Would I be able to watch her manipulate him, gradually pulling him away from me, perhaps planning to get rid of both of us? This morning, as the three of us ate breakfast, I watched them with a new perspective. Keith, tired and a little aloof, but still looking at his wife with love. Vanessa constantly checking her phone, answering messages with a slight smile she was trying to hide. "What are your plans for today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Work," Keith sighed. "I have to finish the paperwork for customs clearance." "I have a client meeting this afternoon." Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. "And then my girlfriends and I were going out for dinner." Keith nodded, not showing any suspicion. I noticed, however, how she avoided mentioning the specific names of the friends or the place of dinner. A typical liar's tactic: fewer details, less chance of getting confused by her own lies. I didn't know what to do. Keep gathering evidence, talk to her directly, or let this lie continue to grow until it consumed our entire family. One thing I knew for sure: I couldn't just sit back and watch my son suffer, but I had to tread carefully, very carefully. All day long, I prepared myself for what was to come. After breakfast, when Keith and Vanessa had left to go about their business, I drove to the public library. There on the computer, I printed out key pages of bank statements that I had photographed on my old cell phone one day when I was alone in the house. The old man with the phone elicited only a sympathetic smile from the librarian. She probably thought I was printing pictures of my grandchildren, but I was typing evidence of my sister-in-law's double life. Regular transfers to a secret account, dates, amounts. Everything said that she was methodically preparing for something. A new life without Keith, perhaps, or without both of us. I didn't know for sure, but I couldn't keep quiet any longer. When I got home, I hid the printouts in an old envelope and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I started cooking dinner. Baked chicken and vegetables, Keith's favorite dish. If we were going to have a hard conversation, at least let the food be good. Vanessa came back first, around 6. She was surprised to see me in the kitchen. "What are you doing?" she asked with undisguised irritation. "Cooking dinner," I answered calmly. "I thought we could all use a good home-cooked meal." "I was going to order something," she tossed her bag on the chair. "You're just wasting groceries." "Senrao, it's no big deal," I continued chopping vegetables. "Besides, Keith likes my chicken." She snorted but didn't say anything, just pulled a bottle of white wine out of the fridge and poured herself a glass. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No harder than usual," she took a sip. "Just tired of it all." "All of what?" I couldn't help but ask. She gave me a long look, then shook her head. "Never mind, I'm going to go change." When Keith got home from work around 7, dinner was ready. He looked exhausted but smiled when he smelled fried chicken. "Dad, did you cook my favorite?" His face brightened up. "Thank you." "You're welcome, son," I patted him on the shoulder. "Go wash your hands and we'll have dinner." We sat down at the table, me across from Keith and Vanessa. She was finishing her second glass of wine and looked a little relaxed, though there was tension in her eyes. "How was your day at work?" I asked Keith as I served him a portion. "Hectic, but productive," he sighed. "Finally got those customs forms sorted out. The shipments should be on schedule now." "I hope so," Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Because our budget can't handle your constant overwork." "How? What do you mean?" Keith looked at her puzzled. "I get paid overtime." "Yeah, but you're spending more on gas, more on eating out," she shrugged. "Plus, we eat more convenience foods because I don't have time to cook for everyone." She said the last word with emphasis, glancing in my direction. The implication was more than transparent. "Vanessa, please." Keith looked embarrassed. "Not now." "When?" She poured herself more wine. "We never talk about it. Our bills are mounting. Our house has turned into... I don't even know what it's become. We can't afford a vacation for the second year." "We'll discuss it later." Keith lowered his voice, giving me an apologetic look. "No, let's discuss it now." I set my fork aside. Vanessa, if my presence is causing financial problems, we can find a solution. Oh, really? Her voice oozed sarcasm. And what would that be? Will you suddenly find a job at your age? Or magically cure all your diseases and stop spending money on medication? Vanessa, Keith raised his voice. Stop it, please. Why? She took another sip of wine. We all know it's true. We spend at least $500 a month to support your father. Electricity, water, groceries, medicine. And he pays us a ridiculous amount that barely covers his food. I felt myself blush, not with shame, with anger. Everything I'd suspected about Vanessa, everything I'd seen in the last few months, had suddenly crystallized into a firm conviction that woman doesn't love my son. She's using him. I understand your concern, Vanessa, I said slowly. But maybe the problem isn't me, but other expenses that Keith doesn't know about. She froze with the glass to her lips. What do you mean? Dad, what are you talking about? Keith looked puzzled. I took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. I think we need to talk about how Vanessa handles the family budget. I looked her straight in the eye. And where the money in your joint account goes. Vanessa set her glass down so hard that the wine spilled onto the tablecloth. You've been going through our financial records? How dare you? I didn't, I lied, feeling that in this situation a little lie was forgivable. I accidentally saw the statements when I was taking Keith's shirts to your bedroom. They were in an open drawer. And you decided to study them? Her eyes narrowed. This is an invasion of our privacy. What's going on? Soniri. Keith looked from me to Vanessa. What statements are we talking about? Your wife has a secret bank account that you don't know about, I said bluntly. She transfers a portion of your paycheck into that account every month, which supposedly goes to general expenses. Keith's face stretched. Is that true, Vanessa? She laughed, but the laugh sounded fake. Keith, are you really going to believe your father's delusions? He might be getting senile dementia. I told you I've noticed some strange behavior. I don't have dementia. I felt the anger rising inside me. And I have proof. I pulled an envelope out of my shirt pocket and placed it on the table. What's this? Keith took the envelope. Statements from Vanessa's secret account, I replied. An account at First National Bank, opened in her name about a year ago. It receives about 15% of your paycheck each month. Keith opened the envelope and began to look through the printouts. His face changed with each page. Disbelief changed to shock, then anger. Vanessa, what is this? His voice shook. Why do you need a secret account? It's not a secret account. She raised her voice. It's my personal savings. I have a right to have my own money. But why didn't you tell me about it? Keith continued flipping through the statements. And why are there amounts here that should be going to pay our bills? I'm saving for a rainy day, she crossed her arms across her chest. You should be grateful for my foresight. Prudence? I couldn't help myself. So when you complain about rising bills and blame it on me, that's foresight? Shut up! Vanessa jumped up. You don't understand anything. You ruined your life, and now you're trying to ruin ours. Vanessa, calm down. Keith put his hand on her shoulder, but she threw it away. No, I will not calm down. She was already furious. I'm tired of this. Tired of living with your father. Tired of saving money on everything. Tired of listening to him cough at night and mumble in the morning. I want a normal life, Keith. We have a normal life. Keith looked shocked at her outburst. No, we don't. She drank her wine in one gulp. We're living like nurses in a nursing home. I didn't sign up for this when I married you. There was a heavy silence. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and prayed that it could take the stress. I didn't want to have a heart attack in the middle of a family drama. So this is what you really think, Keith said quietly. You think my father's a burden. Isn't he a burden? Vanessa grinned bitterly. Be honest for once, Keith. You're not glad he's here. You're just too right to admit it. Keith shook his head. You're wrong. I'm glad my father is with us. Yes, it requires some sacrifices, but he's my family. He's taken care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn. How touching, she puckered her lips. But I can't live like this anymore. Either your father starts paying the full cost of his living, and I mean the real cost, not the measly crumbs he's giving now, or we'll think about a nursing home. I've heard there are some good places in Oakwood. I felt the anger rising in me in a new wave. This woman has been using my son for years, lying to him, possibly cheating with a neighbor, and now she's threatening to send me to a nursing home? It's time for you to pay your rent, or we'll think about the nursing home, she repeated, looking right at me. Make up your mind, Gilbert. I rose slowly from the table. Despite my age, I straightened up to my full height, feeling the fatigue of the last few years disappear. In that moment, I was again the Gilbert who had protected my young son from school bullies, the Gilbert who had supported Susan in her fight against cancer until her last breath. Well, then it's time for everyone to know the truth about you, I said, looking her straight in the eye. What are you talking about, Dad? Keith looked worried. About your wife not only stealing your money, son? I kept looking at Vanessa, who was frozen with a glass in her hand. She's also meeting with our neighbor Reed behind your back. Vanessa paled so dramatically it was as if all the blood had been drained out of her. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Her voice shook. Not bullshit, Vanessa. I shook my head. I saw the messages from Reed on your phone when you asked me to give him to you. I heard you talking to him in the garden when you thought I was asleep. I've seen you come back from house shows with your hair loose and the smell of his cologne. That's absurd. She set her glass down with such force that the stem broke and the wine spilled across the table. Kit, don't listen to him. He's trying to destroy our family. Keith sat motionless, his face whiter than chalk. Is it true? He asked quietly. Are you dating Reed? Of course not. She tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. That's the ramblings of a crazy old man. Reed's just a friend who helps me with the heavy housework when you're not here. You're always at work. Are you accusing me of working hard? Keith's voice got harder. I work to provide for us, so we can have this house, this food, this life. And you're never home, she shouted. You're always at your precious job, and I have to sit here with your father and pretend I like this life. No one asked you to pretend, I said calmly. But no one asked you to lie, cheat, or steal. I don't steal, she turned to me. It's my money. I have the right to control part of our income. But not to lie about it, Keith shook his head. Not to blame my father for rising expenses when in fact you're just transferring money into your secret account. It's not a secret account. She repeated it like a mantra. It's savings. For the future. What future, Vanessa? Keith asked quietly. Our future together? Or for your future with Reed? She was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I pulled another piece of paper out of my pocket. Here's a printout of your cell phone messages, Vanessa. I put it on the table. I didn't want to come to this, but you left me no choice. It was a bluff. I couldn't access her messages, but I knew that if she was really guilty, she'd believe that I was somehow able to do it, and I turned out to be right. She grabbed the piece of paper without even looking at it. You had no right, her voice trailed off. Check for Yuan. This is my private correspondence. So it's true, Keith said, not as a question, but as a statement. You really are dating Reed. Vanessa froze, realizing that she had just given herself away. She slowly lowered her hand to the paper, which, if she'd been more careful, would have been just a printout of a news article. Yeah, it's not what you think, she began to stammer. We're just friends. Yeah, sometimes we have a drink together, but that doesn't mean anything. And the secret account? Keith pointed to the statements. That doesn't mean anything either. I've been saving for us. She tried to put a sincere expression on her face. For our future. Then why didn't you tell me about it? Keith shook his head. We could have saved together. Open a joint savings account. Yeah, I wanted to surprise you. She sounded less and less sure. Save up for a vacation or a new car. I sat down again, feeling my legs weakening. The emotional strain was too much for my age, but I couldn't stop now that the truth was starting to come out. That's a strange way to surprise me, I remarked. Blaming someone else for rising costs while withholding the money yourself. You don't understand. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes glistening with anger and tears. You never understood. You always looked down on me, always thought I wasn't good enough for your son. That's not true, I shook my head. All I ever wanted was for Keith to be happy. And until recently, I thought you were making him happy. I do, she turned to Keith. I make you happy, don't I? We're happy together, Keith. My son sat looking at printouts of bank statements. His shoulders slumped as if an invisible weight had been placed on them. I thought we were happy, he said at last. But happy people don't lie to each other, Vanessa. They don't hide money or meet neighbors behind their partner's back. It's all his fault, Vanessa pointed at me. He made the whole thing up to break us up. He doesn't, and you believe this. That senile old man? Don't you talk about my father like that? Keith's voice became dangerously quiet. He never gave me any reason to doubt his word. And you lied to me about the money. Who knows what else you lied about? Vanessa realized she was losing. Her face contorted with anger. Fine. You want to know the truth? Yes, I have a separate account. Yes, I'm saving money because I don't want to end up like your father, penniless, dependent on other people's favors. I want to have my own independence. Independence from me? Keith looked at her with pain in his eyes. From our marriage? From all this? She put her hand around the room. From this life where I have to make every cent count, where I can't afford a new dress because we're feeding your father, where I can't have a party because your father will get in the way, where I can't even make love to my husband without worrying that the old man will hear us through the wall. I felt myself blush. It was a low blow, but I wasn't going to back down. Vanessa, I understand your frustration, I said as calmly as I could, but lying and cheating isn't the answer. Oh, shut up. She grabbed the bottle of wine. Me? You've ruined everything. Everything. We were happy until you invaded our lives. We weren't happy, Keith said quietly. We were just pretending. Vanessa froze with the bottle in her hand. What did you say? We weren't really happy, Keith repeated. I worked my ass off to provide the life you wanted. You complained about everything I did. We hardly ever talked, apart from discussing bills and shopping. That's not happiness, Vanessa. And you blame it on me? Her voice shook. I'm not blaming anyone. Keith just looked tired. I'm just saying I don't want to live a lie anymore. So you're choosing him over me? She pointed at me. Your father over your wife? I'm choosing the truth, Vanessa. Keith shook his head. I choose a life without lies and manipulation. She set the bottle on the table with such force that it almost fell. Anna, that's beautiful. You think I'm going to fight for you? For this? She circled the room again. You two aren't worth it. Vanessa turned and left the room, her footsteps thumping loudly on the stairs. A few minutes later, we heard the bedroom door slam. Keith and I were left sitting in silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I felt devastated, but at the same time strangely relieved that the truth had finally come out. I'm sorry, son, I said at last. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. Keith looked up at me with tired eyes. It's not your fault, Dad. You just showed me a truth I refused to see. He picked up one of the printouts and looked through it again. All this time she's been lying to me, right to my face. Sharon, people do terrible things sometimes, I put my hand on his shoulder. But you deserve better, son. You always have. I thought I knew her. He shook his head. Thought we were building a life together. And all this time she's been... He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Betraying someone you love is one of the most painful wounds a person can experience. I knew that because I'd seen it destroy other people's lives. Now I've seen it ruin my son's life. What do I do now, Dad? Keith asked. And in that moment he seemed so young, so vulnerable, like he had been when he came to me as a child with broken knees or broken toys. You have to decide for yourself, son. I squeezed his shoulder. But whatever you choose, I'll support you. There were sounds coming from upstairs. Vanessa seemed to be picking up or moving something. Keith raised his eyes to the ceiling, then looked up at me again. Thank you for telling me the truth. His voice was quiet but firm. Even if it hurts. Sometimes the truth is the only cure, I replied, feeling my heart clench with pain for my son. Even if it's bitter. We sat in silence while the sounds of traffic and muffled swearing came from upstairs. A family dinner that was supposed to be a normal evening had turned into a point of no return for all of us. Vanessa paled as she realized her carefully constructed lie was crumbling. And now we were all going to have to live with the consequences of that collapse. The rumbling upstairs continued like the sound of a distant thunderstorm. Vanessa opened and closed the drawers of her dresser, banged cabinet doors, dropped something, and objects thudded against the carpet. Keith and I sat downstairs, hesitant to get up. I, because I didn't want to aggravate the situation with my presence. Keith, because I guess he just didn't know what to say or how to act. "Shouldn't we get up?" I finally asked, "to see what she was doing?" Keith shook his head. "Let her calm down. If I went now, we'd only keep fighting." He was right. In situations like this, it was better to give the person time to cool down, to gather their thoughts. Although, from the sounds of it, Vanessa was more packing than thinking. "I'm sorry about what happened." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't create them, Dad." Keith smiled weakly. "They already existed. You just took the blindfold off." He stood up, went to the window and looked out at the evening garden for a while. It was getting dusk, and the reflection of his face in the glass seemed like a ghost. Pale, lost. "You know, I guessed it," he said, without turning around. "I'd noticed the oddities, the way she was reluctant to talk about money, the way she changed when Reed came over. I didn't want to see." "We often don't see what we're not ready to see," I replied, thinking about the signs I'd ignored when I'd first moved here. "Salan, how long have you known?" Keith turned to me. I had suspected it for a few weeks. I decided to be frank. But it wasn't until recently that I became sure, when I saw her messages and found the transcripts. He nodded, accepting my answer. There was no accusation on his face, only weariness and pain. "Was she really going to put you in a nursing home?" "I guess so," I sighed. She'd never made it a secret that she thought I was a burden. She just hadn't said so openly before. The conversation was interrupted by the clatter of heels on the stairs. Vanessa was coming down, holding a small suitcase. Her face was pale but determined, her eyes red. She had obviously been crying, but was holding it together now. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, looking at us. "I'm leaving for my parents," she announced. "I need time to think." "What's there to think about?" Keith's voice sounded tired. "You lied to me. You've been seeing someone else. You've been stealing our money together." "I didn't steal," her voice trailed off. "It was my money. I'm entitled to a share of our income." "It's not about the money, Vanessa." Keith shook his head. "It's about you hiding it all." "Why? If it was your money, why couldn't you tell me about it?" She was silent, clutching the handle of the suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "And Reed?" Keith continued. "Are you going to tell me I got it wrong too?" "Reed's just a friend." She lifted her chin. "Yes, we spend time together sometimes. But you're always at work, Kit. What am I supposed to do? Sit at home and stare at the walls? Or your father?" I felt myself blush with anger, but I held back. Now was not the time for another fight. "You could have been honest." Keith looked devastated. "Say you're lonely, that you want more companionship. We could have found a solution." "What solution?" She laughed bitterly. "Would you work less, or let me spend more money on myself? Or would you agree to let your father move into a nursing home?" Keith was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. We all knew that the situation had gone too far for simple solutions. "Exactly," Vanessa nodded, as if his silence confirmed that she was right. "And Masisham, nothing would have changed. That's why I did what I did." "Including Reed?" Keith finally looked up. Vanessa looked away, avoiding his gaze. "I already told you. We're friends. Friends who meet in secret?" I couldn't help myself. "Friends who exchange intimate messages?" "And you!" She turned to me, eyes blazing with rage. "You had no right to read my messages. It's a violation of privacy. It's illegal. As illegal as stealing your husband's money?" I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't steal." She was almost screaming. "It was my share." "A share Keith didn't know about," I shook my head. "A share that you were hiding while blaming me for the rising costs. Because you actually increased our expenses." She pointed her finger at me. "Water, electricity, food, medicine, all of it costs money. Which I was paying for, Myra reminded her. And you know I was offering to pay more. Your crumbs didn't cover anything. She waved it away. Enough. Keith raised his voice, which rarely happened. Stop blaming each other. The fact is, Vanessa, you lied to me. About the money, about Reed, about your feelings for my father. You've been faking it for years. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. And you, her voice was quieter but no less venomous. You pretended that everything was fine, that you were happy with our life, that you weren't tired of working your ass off to provide a home we could barely afford. I worked to provide for us. Keith waved his hands. So you could have everything you wanted. Everything but yourself, she shook her head. You were never there for me, Kit. Physically, yes, but in your mind you were always somewhere else. At work, with your dad, with your stupid motorcycle. Anywhere but with me. I could see how those words hurt Keith. Perhaps there was some truth to them. My son had always been a workaholic, always putting work and responsibilities first. But that didn't excuse her deception. If you weren't happy with something, you should have said so. Keith clenched his fists. Not have an affair with a neighbor and save money behind my back. I tried to talk. She threw up her hands. I've been trying for years, but you always waved it off. Not now, dear, I'm tired. Let's discuss it later. I'm busy at work. It was never later, Keith. They stood across from each other like two fighters in a ring, exhausted but still determined. I felt unnecessary in this scene, but I couldn't leave, partly out of concern for Keith, partly because this situation had arisen because of me, and I had to see it through to the end. I'm leaving. Vanessa finally broke the heavy silence. I need time to think, and so do you. What's there to think about? Keith repeated his question. Were you going to leave me for Reed? Was that true? She was silent, avoiding his gaze, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. Jesus! Keith ran his hand over his face. Is it that bad? Were you really planning to leave me? I don't know what I was planning. Her voice shook. I just knew I couldn't live like this anymore. In this house with the constant tension, with your father, with our problems, I wanted to have a backup plan. Shut it. An escape plan, Keith grinned bitterly. And Reed was part of that plan? Vanessa lowered her eyes. We were just talking. He understood me. He listened. He didn't judge. And you fell in love with him. It wasn't a question. I don't know how I feel, she raised her voice. I'm confused, okay? I don't know what I want. Except that you don't want to be here. Keith nodded, as if finally accepting the truth. You don't want to be with me. No, I didn't say that. She shook her head. I just wanted space, opportunity, choice. A choice between me and another man? Keith said it quietly, but each word dropped like a stone. Vanessa didn't answer, and her silence was confirmation. Go away, Keith turned away. Go to your parents, go to Reed's, wherever you want. I don't care. Keith, she took a step toward him, but stopped when he held up a hand. Don't. His voice sounded tired. Just walk away. We both need time to think. She stood without moving, then nodded. I'll call you when I'm settled. Don't bother. He still didn't look at her. Vanessa pressed her lips together, then turned and headed for the door. As she passed me, she stopped. Are you satisfied? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. You destroyed our family. Son, I didn't destroy your family, Vanessa. I shook my head. You did it yourself when you chose to live a lie. She stared at me for a long moment, then abruptly turned away and walked out. The front door slammed, her car engine rumbled, the gravel in the driveway creaked, and then it was gone. She was gone. Keith and I were alone in a house that suddenly seemed too big and too quiet. He stood at the window looking out into the darkening garden. His shoulders slumped as if he had aged 10 years overnight. I'm sorry, son. I walked over to him, not knowing what else to say. You know what the weirdest thing is, Dad? He didn't turn around. I feel the pain, but not the shock. It's like a part of me always knew this would happen, that something was wrong between us. Sometimes we feel the truth even when we refuse to admit it. I put my hand on his shoulder. Our subconscious is smarter than we realize. Keith finally turned to me. There were tears in his eyes, but he didn't let them spill. "What did I do wrong, Dad?" His voice trembled. "Where did I go wrong?" My heart squeezed at those words. My strong, confident son, who had always known what he wanted out of life, now stood before me broken and lost. "You didn't do anything wrong, Keith," I squeezed his shoulder. "Sometimes people just change. Their feelings change. Their priorities change. Or they were never who we thought they were." He grinned bitterly. "I thought I knew Vanessa, that she loved me the way I loved her. Maybe she did," I tried to be fair, "in the beginning. But then something changed." "Yeah, Reed showed up." Keith turned away again. Younger, freer, without a burdensome father around his neck. "Don't say that," I shook my head. "It's not about me. Who else would it be about?" He waved his hands in the air. "Everything changed when you moved in with us." Vanessa became irritable, unhappy. I thought it was temporary, that she'd get used to it. But it just got worse. "Keith," I made him turn to me, "listen to me carefully. If Vanessa really loved you, my moving in wouldn't change anything. Yes, there would be some tension, a period of adjustment, but true love withstands adversity." He looked at me like he wanted to believe me, but he couldn't. "Anna, if she was looking for an excuse to leave, she'd find one with or without me," I continued. "If not me, then something else. Your job, your house, financial problems, anything." Keith nodded slowly, as if my words were beginning to penetrate his pain. "Maybe you're right," he sighed, "but that doesn't make it any easier." "I know, son." I put my arms around him, feeling him tense up and then relax in my arms. "I know." We stood like that for a while, father and son, sharing grief and comfort as we'd done all our lives. Once I'd comforted him after broken knees and lost games. Now, after a broken heart. "What am I supposed to do now, Dad?" Keith asked when we finally pulled away from each other. "What you always did when you faced difficulties," I smiled weakly. "Accept the situation, think about it, and decide how to proceed." "Shara ornam." "Sounds easy," he shook his head, "but I don't even know where to start." "Start by eating." I pointed to the cool dinner that was still on the table. "Then get some sleep. Everything will look clearer in the morning." He smiled weakly, and in that smile I saw an echo of little Keith, who always believed his daddy knew how to fix everything. "I'm not hungry," he shook his head, "but you're right about sleep. I'm tired as hell." We cleared the table in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. When the dishes were washed and the kitchen cleaned up, Keith poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room, staring out the darkness outside the window. "You don't know how angry I am," he said without looking at me. "At her, at myself, even at you, even though it's unfair." "I understand." I sat down across from him. "Anger is a normal reaction. You know what the most frustrating thing is?" He took a sip. "Not that she was dating Reed. It's not that she was saving money behind my back. It's that she blamed you for all of our problems. She made me think you were the reason our marriage was falling apart at the seams." I kept quiet, letting him talk. "And I almost believed it," he shook his head. "Almost started to see you as a burden, like a problem to be solved. God, how could I?" "Well, you loved her and you wanted your marriage to work," I said softly. "It's natural to compromise, to try to make your partner happy. But not at the expense of your own father." He looked ashamed. "Not at the expense of the man who was always there for me, no matter what happened." "Keith," I leaned forward, "I never doubted your love. I never thought you'd choose her over me. But if it had happened, I would have understood. I really would." He gave me a long look. "You're better than I deserve, Dad." "Not true," I shook my head. "You deserve the best, son. You always have." We sat in a silence that didn't seem so heavy now. There was still tension in the air, but it was mixed with relief. The truth, no matter how bitter, was always better than a lie. "I think I ought to talk to her," said Keith after a long silence. "When we've both calmed down, try to understand what went wrong." "If that's what you want," I nodded, "but don't make any hasty decisions. Give yourself time to think." "I don't know if there's much to think about," he finished his whiskey, "after everything that's come to light today. I'm not sure there's anything that can be salvaged." "That's for you to decide," I sighed. "I know, but whatever you choose, I'll support you. Keith set down his empty glass and rubbed his face with his hands. You know what's weird, Dad? Part of me feels relieved. It's like I've been carrying a heavy load all this time without realizing it. And now, he's down. It hurts, but it's easier to breathe. I knew what he meant. Living a lie is a constant strain, even if you don't realize the deception. Something inside you always knows something is wrong, and that part never lets you fully relax. I should probably go to bed. Keith got up. Tomorrow will be a new day. Good night, son. I got up too. If you need anything, I know, he smiled weakly. You're always there for me. When he left, I was alone in the living room. The house seemed strangely empty without Vanessa, though her presence had never been particularly warm or welcoming. I sat down in a chair, feeling the fatigue come over me. I'd done what I had to do, revealed the truth, protected my son from further deception. But then why did I feel so heavy? Why did the guilt gnaw at me? Perhaps because, despite my excuses, I had invaded Vanessa and Keith's privacy, going through their files, reading their emails, going behind my son's back instead of sharing my suspicions right away. Or maybe it was because part of me knew, if I hadn't moved in with them, maybe their marriage wouldn't have been under so much pressure. Maybe Vanessa wouldn't have started looking for comfort on the side. Maybe they'd still be together, even if not perfectly happy. But then I remembered the words I'd said to Keith. If Vanessa was looking for an excuse to leave, she'd find it with or without me. True love withstands adversity, and I knew it was true. If their feelings were strong enough, my moving out would be just another challenge they'd overcome together. Not a stumbling block that ruined their union. Sleep wouldn't come. I sat in my chair listening to the silence of the house and thinking about how strangely life works. In the morning I was an elderly man, living at the mercy of my sister-in-law, afraid to say a word lest I irritate her. And now I felt both guilt and relief at the same time. Guilt for the pain Keith was in, and relief that the truth had finally come out. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Would Vanessa come back to try to save the marriage? Or would she file for divorce? Would Keith forgive her or decide the betrayal was too serious? What would happen to me, to the house, to our small, broken family? But one thing I knew for sure, whatever the consequences of my action, I couldn't do otherwise. There are times in life when you have to stand up and tell the truth, even if it destroys the world around you. Because a world built on lies will collapse sooner or later, and then the wreckage can be even more destructive. I finally got up and went to my room. Tomorrow would be a new day, and whatever it brought, Keith and I would face it together, as we always had. Together, shoulder to shoulder, father and son against all the storms life can throw at us. The morning came gray, with low clouds hanging over the garden like harbingers of an impending storm. I woke up early with a heavy feeling somewhere under my ribs, a mixture of guilt and relief that had haunted me all night. When I went down to the kitchen, I found Keith already there, sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee, staring out the window with an unseeing gaze. He didn't even turn around when I walked in, though he usually had an amazing ability to sense my presence. "Good morning," I said quietly, not wanting to startle him. He flinched as if coming out of deep thought. "Ah, Dad, good morning." "Sorry, I was thinking." "Did you sleep?" I walked over to the coffee maker, which was still warm. "A little," he shrugged. 2 hours, maybe 3. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, scrutinizing my son. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled t-shirt, stubble. He looked exhausted, but at the same time oddly calm, like a man who'd made an important decision. "Vanessa called," he said, staring into his cup. "About 1 o'clock in the morning." I didn't want to push, but I needed the information. "She's at her parents'. Said she was coming to get the rest of her stuff this afternoon." Keith ran a hand through his hair. "I'd better leave when she's here. I'm not ready for another conversation." I nodded, understanding his desire to avoid another confrontation. "I can leave with you if you want." Keith shook his head. "No, someone has to be here to see to it that she—" He fell silent, but I understood. To make sure she doesn't take anything but her things. We ate breakfast in silence. I made toast and eggs, but Keith barely touched his portion. His mind was clearly wandering somewhere far away. "Did she say anything else?" I asked at last, unable to bear the silence. Keith sighed. A lot of things. That I had it all wrong. That you were manipulating me. That she was entitled to half the house and all the property. And Reed, I couldn't help but ask. She didn't say anything about that. A bitter grin tugged at his lips. She said I never really loved her, though. That I'd always put work in you before her. That's not true, I shook my head. You always did your best for your family. Maybe that's true, Dad. Keith finally looked up at me. Maybe I really was too busy to notice how unhappy she was. Oh, Keith, I put my hand on his wrist. If she wasn't happy, she could have said so. Talk to you, not save up money behind your back and date another man. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Self-sabotage is a common reaction to betrayal by a loved one. People look for reasons in themselves, trying to find excuses for the actions of the one who betrayed them. So, I called Thomas, Keith said, referring to his lawyer friend. He said he could meet with me today to discuss options. Are you sure you're up for that? I asked cautiously. Maybe you should give yourself some time to think, to cool down. What's to think about, Dad? He shrugged. She was seeing someone else. She's been saving up to leave me. She's been lying to my face for years. There's nothing to think about. I nodded, accepting his determination. Keith was always like that. When he realized the situation was hopeless, he didn't waste time on fruitless hopes, cut it off and moved on. Sometimes I even envied that trait of his. After breakfast, Keith left. To meet Thomas, he said, though I suspected he just needed time alone to collect his thoughts away from a home that now held too many painful memories. I was left alone, trying to occupy myself with the usual chores. I washed the dishes, cleaned up the kitchen, even started making dinner, though I wasn't sure if either of us would be hungry. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Vanessa had come to get her things. When I opened the door, I saw her, pale with red eyes but holding herself with dignity. Standing next to her was an older woman, her mother. I could tell from the similarity in her facial features. She? Gilbert, Vanessa nodded, avoiding my eyes. This is my mother, Doris. We've come to get my things. Hello, I nodded to the woman, who looked at me with undisguised distaste. Apparently, Vanessa had presented her version of events. Is Keith home? Vanessa asked, walking past me into the hallway. No, he's in a meeting, I replied, trying to sound neutral. Convenient, she grinned. I saw him running away so he wouldn't have to see me. I didn't respond to that provocation. Vanessa and her mother went upstairs, and soon I heard them opening closets and pulling out dresser drawers. I stayed downstairs, determined not to disturb them, but not to leave the house completely unattended either. An hour later, they came down with several suitcases and boxes. That's not all, Vanessa said, looking at me defiantly. I'll be back for the rest later. Summer, no, okay, I nodded. She lingered in the doorway to the living room, looking around the room as if memorizing. You know, I'm entitled to half of this house, she said suddenly. We bought it with Keith. That's for you and Keith to decide. I tried to keep my tone neutral. No, it's up to the court, her mother interjected. If your son thinks he can just throw my daughter out on the street, he's sorely mistaken. No one's throwing anyone out. I felt my irritation rising. Vanessa left on her own. After you turned your own son against her, Doris raised her voice. Vanessa told me how you went through their files, how you made up stories about her and the neighbor. Mom, please. Vanessa put her hand on her shoulder. Not now. No, now. The old woman wouldn't stop. That old man ruined your family. He should know what he's done. With respect, Doris, I said as calmly as I could. Your daughter destroyed her family when she decided to cheat on my son and date another man. Lies, she almost spit the word out. Reed is just a friend. Vanessa would never… Mom! Vanessa raised her voice now. That's enough. Come on, let's get the stuff to the car. They left and I stood in the hallway, trying to control my emotions. Of course, Vanessa had made it look good. Of course, her mother believed her daughter over her evil father-in-law. And maybe in some alternate reality, Vanessa really did believe that I made it all up, and it wasn't her fault. By the time they came back for the second batch of stuff, I was calmer. I sat in the living room with a book, pretending to be engrossed in my reading, but watching them scurry up and down the stairs with boxes and bags. Finally, Vanessa stopped in front of me. You should know, Gilbert. Her voice was quiet but firm. I'm not just going to leave all this behind. I'm entitled to my share. Of course, I nodded. This is between you and Keith. No, it's between all of us, she squinted. You interfered in our marriage. You turned Keith against me. You made up that story with Reed. Vanessa, I interrupted her. We both know the truth. I saw the messages on your phone. I've seen you come back from house shows. I found statements from your secret account. She was silent, pressing her lips into a thin line. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, I continued softer. I really didn't. I just couldn't stand to see you use my son anymore. I loved him, she said quietly, in my own way. Maybe not like in books or movies, but I loved him. I didn't know what to say to that. Perhaps she did love Keith as much as she was capable of that feeling, but her love was too weak to stand the test. I'm sorry for the way things turned out, I said finally. She nodded, then turned and walked away without another word. I heard her and my mother loading things into the car, the engine starting, the gravel squeaking under the tires. Once again, the house fell into silence. Keith came back late in the afternoon. I was beginning to worry when I heard the sound of his key in the lock. He looked exhausted, but more focused than he had been in the morning. Was Vanessa here? He asked, taking off his jacket. Yeah, with my mother, I nodded. So, took a lot of stuff. Said she'd come back for the rest later. Keith sighed. Good. I want her to get all her stuff as soon as possible. The sooner we get this over with, the better. How did the meeting with Thomas go? I asked, following him into the kitchen. Fine. He pulled a bottle of beer out of the fridge. He explained my options. If Vanessa agrees to an amicable resolution, we can divide the property without a trial. If not, he shrugged, we'll have to go to court. She mentioned she's entitled to half the house, I said carefully. Yeah, technically she does. Keith took a sip. The house is in both of our names, but I put up most of the down payment, the money from the sale of my first apartment. Thomas said it could be used in court. I nodded, feeling both relieved and anxious at the same time. Court proceedings are always painful and often unpredictable. I've started divorce proceedings, Keith said abruptly. I filed today. So soon? I couldn't hide my surprise. Are you sure you don't want to wait and think about it? What's there to think about, Dad? He shook his head. She was seeing someone else. She lied to me. She was saving up to leave. Even if I wanted to forgive, how could I trust her again? I understood his logic. Trust once broken is very hard to rebuild, especially when the betrayal was so layered. Don't you think you're rushing into a decision? I still asked, feeling I had to offer an alternative point of view. Maybe counseling with a psychologist. Family therapy. Keith looked at me with a slight smile. You've always taught me not to rush into big decisions. But this time, Dad, I'm confident. Do you know why? I shook my head, waiting for his explanation. Because I feel nothing but relief, he said quietly. There's pain, of course. The hurt, the anger. But underneath them, relief, like I can finally breathe. I knew what he was talking about. Sometimes the end of a relationship, even a painful one, brings release, especially if that relationship had been toxic for a long time. We moved into the living room, sat in the armchairs as we had done every night for the past few months. Only now Vanessa's shadow didn't stand between us, nor did the tension of unspoken words and repressed emotions hang between us. I have to tell you something, Dad. Keith leaned forward, holding the beer bottle with both hands. I knew something was wrong. I've known for a long time. I just didn't want to admit it. What do you mean? Oh, I asked, even though I knew the answer. Vanessa's been different since you moved in. Irritable, distant. At first I thought it was a natural reaction, a change in family dynamics, a new person in the house. But then, he paused, choosing his words. Then I noticed that she was staying late after work more and more often, checking her phone more often and quickly putting it away when I came over, talking more and more about Reed. Why didn't you say anything? I asked gently. Because I was afraid. He looked at me with so much pain in his eyes that my heart squeezed. Afraid my suspicions would be true. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of being alone. You'll never be alone, son. I put my hand on his shoulder. I know, he smiled weakly. But fear isn't always rational. We were silent. each of us thinking about something else. It was starting to rain outside the window, large drops drumming on the glass, as if nature wanted to speak too. I have to admit something too, I said after a long pause. I'd seen the signs much earlier than I'd acted on them. I saw the way she treated you, the way she manipulates you, how she distances you from me. Why didn't you say anything? Now it was his turn to ask. Same reason, I sighed. I was afraid. Afraid of causing problems in your marriage. Afraid you'd choose her side and it would ruin our relationship. Afraid of being on the street. I would never, he started, but I raised my hand. I know, son. But like you said, fear isn't always rational. We sat in silence, broken only by the sound of the rain, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. A strange relief spilled over between us, of honesty, of not having to pretend, of knowing that we could finally be ourselves. Do you know what I think? Keith said, setting the empty bottle on the table. We've both lived in fear for too long. I've been afraid of the truth about Vanessa. You were afraid of my reaction, and as a result, we were both unhappy. It wasn't just us. I shook my head. Vanessa was miserable too, in her own way. Sonam, maybe, Keith nodded. But she chose lies over honesty, deception instead of straight talk. That was her choice. I couldn't disagree. Whatever the circumstances, each of us always has the choice to tell the truth or lie, to act or enact, to fight or give up. I'm going to start looking for an apartment, I said, deciding to change the subject. Something inexpensive, within the limits of my pension. Keith looked at me in surprise. What are you talking about? Well, now that Vanessa's gone, you might want some privacy. I tried to sound nonchalant. Maybe meet someone new. I don't think the new girl will like living with your old dad. Dad? Keith straightened up, looking at me indignantly. You're not going anywhere. This is your home now. It's our home. Huh. But I don't want to be a burden, I said quietly. I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You're my father, and I want you here, especially now that he stopped talking, but I understood, especially now that he's going through a painful divorce. Are you sure? I still had my doubts. I could find something nearby. We could see each other every day. I'm sure. He stood up and walked over to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. Dad, we're a family, and now more than ever, we need to stick together, support each other. I felt a lump go down my throat. My boy, my son, who had just been betrayed by the woman he loved, was thinking of ways to support me. I'd always been proud of him, but in this moment, pride mixed with endless love and gratitude. Okay, I covered his hand with mine. If you're sure. I'm sure, he squeezed my shoulder. What's more, I have an idea. I'm thinking of selling this house. What? I looked at him in surprise. But you love this house. You and Vanessa have put so much work into fixing it up. Exactly, he nodded. Too many memories. Too much Vanessa. I think it would be easier for both of us to start fresh, in a new place, without the ghosts of the past. I understood his logic. A house holds the energy of the people who lived in it. Every corner of it reminded me of Vanessa, her things, her interior tastes, her presence. I talked to Thomas about it, Keith continued. He said that if I agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds with Vanessa, it might make the divorce easier. She'd get her share of the money and I'd get mine, and we'd be free of each other. And you? What are you going to do? I asked. Buy something new. Smaller, maybe, but ours. For you and me, Dad. His eyes shone with determination. A place where we'd both feel at home, not guests. I didn't know what to say. The idea was tempting, a new home, without the painful memories, without the constant feeling of being in someone else's territory. But at the same time, I worried about Keith. Would it be too drastic to sell the house he loved so much? You don't have to do it for me, I said finally. I can adapt to any circumstances. I'm not just doing this for you, he shook his head. I'm doing it for both of us. I don't want to live here, Dad. Every corner will remind me of Vanessa, of her betrayal. I want to start over, in a place not poisoned by lies. I nodded, understanding his feelings. Sometimes a physical space becomes too closely tied to painful memories, and the only way to heal is a change of scenery. If you're sure that's what you want, I said softly, I'll support you, whatever it takes. I know, Dad, he smiled, and in that smile I saw a glimmer of hope, the first since this whole thing started. We'll get through this, together. The rain outside the window intensified into a downpour, but inside the house, despite all the problems, it felt a little warmer. It was as if the heavy blanket of lies and pretense that had suffocated us for months had finally been thrown off, allowing us to breathe freely. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay in my narrow bed listening to the sound of the rain and thinking about the future, about the new house that would truly be ours, about how Keith would handle the divorce and whether he would ever be able to trust again, about Vanessa, who, despite everything she'd done, also deserved a chance at happiness, even if not with my son. I didn't know what the next days and weeks would bring. Divorce is rarely easy or pleasant. Vanessa could turn it into a real war, especially if she felt cornered. But no matter what happened, Keith and I would face it together, as a family, like we always do.